All right. Does it say recording?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. All right, let's start. All right, hello everyone. Our content standard is going to be HSS 3.2. Students describe the American Indian nations in the local region long ago and in the recent past. And our learning objective is going to be HSS 3.2.1. Students will be able to describe the national identities, religious beliefs, customs, and various folklore traditions through an outline, block journal, or mind map with 6 out of 9 characteristics. And then we're going to be doing a mix of station and parallel teaching.
So to start off our lesson, we will be doing a parallel teaching at different stations. So I will be talking about that part right now, but I'll be talking for all of us, which will be happening at the same time at each different station. So to start off, the teachers will have a attention grabber. And for today, or for the lesson, we decided to do class, which will then have the group of students respond with yes, yes. And the teacher will then go over the guidelines to be at the group. Since there will be many groups, the teacher will remind the students about the noise level by saying we will be listening to our station teacher as well as chatting with our classmates today. We need to remember to keep our noise level at a low table talk level so all of our students are able to hear who they're talking to and can concentrate. We will be getting into different centers today. I will come around and let you know if you are at station A, B, or C. And then once that is done, the teacher will also then say, when I give you your group, you may quietly move to the table and wait for the next part of instruction. The teacher will split students into 3 groups based on where they are already sitting. And there'll be center A with Kelsey, center B with Haley, and then center C with me. And then at this point, students will be seated in groups A, B, and C. And then the station teacher will then direct students separately at each table. So the teacher will then ask the students to identify the tribal symbols and tattoos by using the images that you see on screen right now. They will be spread out through the table. So then the teacher will say, let's look at these symbols and see if you have any predictions on what they are and what they might mean. So during this time, the teachers will give the students a couple minutes to look over all the 3 different symbol pages that we have provided for them. And as you can see, the names are blacked out or whited out. So that way they can discuss it on their own. So once the time has been provided, the teacher will then gather the group back by asking a question of what are the symbols and what they think they mean. So some of the responses could be drawings, pictures, or actually naming the images as like fish, arrows, people, a man, a home, a tent. And once everyone or every student has a chance to talk about it, the teacher will then show the images again, but this time with the pictures or the names of the pictures not whited out, so that way they can see the symbols and what they actually mean. So teacher will let the kids have about a minute or so to look through to see if their guesses were correct. And then the teacher will continue by saying the symbols you see are used by Native Americans from the past to be able to communicate. And these drawings you see are what Native Americans are using now to keep in touch with their ancestors. So you would show the last picture as kind of like a attention grabber at the end to let the kids know that Native Americans now kind of have these tattoo symbols on them to kind of keep in touch with their ancestors and the symbols that they saw at the previous pages to kind of show them how it's slowly been evolving from then to now, basically. And then the teacher will continue by saying that now that we've looked a little into Native Americans, we're going to see what we as a class know about Native Americans by using the KWL chart. And then each station, there will be a KWL chart, and the teacher would ask the students to complete the K and ask, what do you know about Native Americans? Do you know any specific nations? What do you know about California Native Americans? So the teacher talk would be take a moment and talk with each other at your table about any answers to these questions. So we'll give them another couple minutes to come up with some answers for that. And then the teacher would continue to say, now that we have a few minutes to chat, would anyone like to share what their group discussed? Some possible responses might be they lived in teepees, they wear feathers on their head. My neighbor is Native American. They own casinos, or they made their own tools. And then the teacher would transition saying, okay, so we already know a little bit. We can use these ideas to determine what we want to know. And that would be for the W section. And then the teacher would ask types of questions like, what are you curious about? What do you want to know more about? What do you want to know about California natives? What resources do we have where we can find these answers? And then some possible teaching or some possible responses from the students would be, what did they eat? What kind of toys did kids play with? How did they get there? Or do they look the same now?
Okay, and then moving on to the exploration part, we would be using parallel teaching. So we would be working together to do a gallery walk, which would take roughly 30 minutes. So the teachers at each station would direct our students. Now that we talked a bit about Native Americans, we'll be doing a gallery walk, and we'll be looking at pictures and artifacts while you are walking around, and we'll give them sticky notes. You can take these sticky notes and leave them by different artifacts with predictions of what you think it might have been used for, what you find interesting, and if you have any questions about it. And then we would give the students around 5 minutes to look around and leave their sticky notes. So some of the images that they would be seeing are the ones Haley has right there projected. So they would just be walking through and looking at these. And then after about 5 minutes, each teacher will say, okay, everyone finish up with any notes that you are currently writing and return back to your stations. Once the students are back in the seats, each teacher will say, let's take another couple of minutes to have some peer share time when you can talk with your group about what you wrote down. This will give them some time to talk with their neighbors and share their ideas. The teacher would say, remember to discuss anything you found interesting, what you think these artifacts were used for, or what questions you have. So basically reminding them to stay on task. Station teachers at this time would walk around their tables, listening to what the students are saying and listening for their predictions and any questions that they were having. We planned about 2 to 3 minutes for this portion because depending on the buffer zone, if one station is a little bit ahead or behind, we have a little bit of time to work with. At the end of this, the teacher would ask for volunteers by saying, can I get someone to tell me which artifact you found most interesting? What do you think it was used for? What leads you to believe that? And if anybody else has any other predictions. For this portion, we're thinking about 5 to 8 minutes and choosing about 3 students, more or less, depending on who wants to share. Then the teachers at each station would say, we're going to pick back up here tomorrow and discuss more about the tribes. And then the next day, we would be moving on to station teaching. And I can go through this part and then talk about each station individually. So we're in the explanation portion now. So teachers at each of their centers would say yesterday, kind of recap, yesterday we got the chance to look at some artifacts and photos from tribes. Today we are going to learn more about them. I want to remind everyone to remember to keep our noise levels down to table talk in order to make sure others can hear and understand what is happening at their center. If it is too loud, we won't be able to concentrate or teach other group members later on. And then we would have everybody return back to their stations that they were in yesterday. Then at each station, once the students are seated, we would recap for our KWL, going back to that. So we would say, going off what we established in the K section of our KWL, what do you think they ate? What do you think they wore? What do you think they believed? How did they live? What did their houses look like? What kind of animals or crops would be found in this area? How did the landscape affect their way of life? What challenges did geography pose? How do we know this? What evidence did we see that proves this? What kind of challenges did they face? And then just making connections about what they still want to know or what they already have seen. And then we would begin to transition into our centers by saying at the end of the time in the centers, we will become experts in whichever tribe their center is working with. Then we will meet with other centers and form new groups. In these new groups, you will have a job, either a reporter or recorder, and you will teach your fellow classmates about the tribe. So as a kind of overall, each center would be going over food, living conditions, location, clothing, religion, and traditions by using a variety of materials, whatever each teacher chose. So I am Station A, so I would start by just explaining that we're going to learn about the Miwoks who lived in this area, meaning California, in the Central Valley area. We're going to start by watching a short video that explains a little bit about the Miwok tribe. Everyone should be listening for important information such as where and what they lived in, their beliefs, what food they ate, and other facts you find interesting. It's a good idea to jot down these ideas because they will help us later with our activity. So then I have a video link that I would play for them, and it's about a 2-minute video that just explains, it gives them real life pictures and like an example of what these areas looked like and kind of briefly goes over each of those characteristics. So I would just want them to be listening for some of that information. So after that was over, I would ask them, where did we hear the Miwok tribe people lived and in what areas? So some responses might be by the water, coastal, California, and then I would say they lived in California, and the video also mentions they live near water. So this includes coastal areas as well. Why do you think they live near water? Some responses might be for drinking, to fish, and I would say they stay close to water for a variety of reasons and remind them that we need water to survive. So they could have used the streams for drinking, for food sources, to clean things, and more. And then I would ask them what kind of housing did they live in, and if anybody remembers from the video specifically. Some responses might be huts, grass houses, and then I would let them know that the video mentioned they lived in grass huts that were waterproofed, and I would ask them how they waterproofed their homes to make sure they were understanding and pulling things from the video. So some responses might be with animal skin or mud, and I would remind them that the Miwok tribe used alkali to protect their homes from rain, and I would ask them how long these houses last. They would probably say about 1 year, which is from the video. So I would just kind of put this into perspective for them, mentioning that, can you imagine having to rebuild your house every year, and then showing them some pictures of what these houses looked like. I would have a couple of books that had pictures that they could look through and spend a couple of minutes to see if they spotted any that were interesting or wanted to talk about. During this time, I would ask, do we see how these homes were protected from the outside elements? How long do you think it took to build these? Were all of them made of mud and grass? What are the materials? Then I would tell them, now that we've seen some pictures, let's move towards religion and ask if they remembered what they practiced. So some responses might be dancing, Coyote Man, equality. And I would tell them they did have a deity, but what does deity mean? And ask them for possible answers. Some kids might say like a god or a higher power. And I would let them know that it's another word for gods or goddesses, meaning they were multiple gods believed in. The Coyote Man was believed to have created people from feathers. They also mentioned nature. What is the Miwok's connection with nature? Some students might respond with gifts to nature. They had nothing wasted. And I'll remind them that we learned that they gave gifts to nature as a way of saying thank you. They also mentioned how they were very resourceful in the way they did not waste any animal part. And then I would say, because the video mentions how they helped preserve the Earth's resources, unlike we do currently sometimes, take a few seconds to talk with your elbow buddy about what this could mean and ask for people to share. Some responses might be they didn't create any waste, they gave gifts to nature. So I would remind them that they only took what they needed to survive and didn't create any waste, and kind of relate that back to today. And then I would go to the California Parks website where they talk more about specifically their food, and I would have them look through and ask them questions. Around the 5th paragraph, it starts with, like most California Indian groups, and I would have them take turns with their partners reading a couple sentences up until the paragraph that says the village was. So it's only a couple paragraphs. And I would be listening during this time to students reading, making sure they're able to pronounce and read the words, and helping any groups that are struggling. I would go back by saying, now that we had a few minutes to learn more about how they used acorns for food, which is listed in the website, let's look at how they dressed in their clothing. I would direct them to this next website, which details exactly what the Miwok clothing looked like. And I would read the 2.5 paragraphs on the website out loud, just about what they wore, which includes they didn't wear much clothing, but they had moccasins for shoes that protected their feet. They painted their faces sometimes to participate in religious dances. What did they mention about Miwok people today? So trying to bring it current for them. Some responses would be they still wear moccasins, jewelry, and I would let them know they also mentioned that they wear modern clothes while continuing to have beaded jewelry or that same type of footwear. So their culture is changing, just like some of the things we used to do or wear changes. It does for many people as well. So one of the last things that we're going to learn is about some of their folklore traditions and myths. And I would read this creation myth aloud, which talks about a certain creation myth that they believed in. And I would have them close their eyes and read this aloud so that they could picture different things from the story. I would ask them what they were visualizing. Did anybody see something really cool that they wanted to share? And the responses will obviously be varied at this time. So closing up, I would say we heard once again about the Coyote Man and other animals who were like these people. How did these connect to their beliefs? What was important to them, and how do we know this? So some responses would be animals, because they're talking about them as being their gods and creating their people.
Okay, and I would be station B, and we would start off once the students are all seated. We're going to learn a little bit about the Chumash tribe in the center. To start, the Chumash tribe originated on the Santa Barbara Islands, and their name means shell bead people. Let's all take a look at this website that describes the Chumash tribe and what they ate, wore, lived, and traditions for both in the past and today. Make sure to follow along and write in your notebooks as I read what the website has to say. And I would be using this website, which I found is really good for kids, and it explains different things, different characteristics about the tribe, and it does describe how they lived in the past and how they do live today. So some questions I would ask them. So what were the roles of the men and the women in the past? And some responses would be men hunted and fished, and women would cook and take care of the children. Then I would ask, were there any roles that both men and women did? If so, what were they? And they could respond with, yes, they were both storytellers, artists, and they practiced medicine and could be the chief. And then what kind of houses did the Chumash live in the past, and what do they live in now? And they could say they lived in houses made out of grass, and now they live in regular houses or apartments. And then I would ask, what did the Chumash eat? And they could respond with they ate fish, seals, otters, clams, nuts, fruits, and bread made out of acorn meal. And so now that we know a little bit about the Chumash tribe, let's watch a video about their creation story. And I found this video on YouTube of a woman from the Chumash tribe, and she explains their creation story, also known as the Rainbow Bridge. And we did find a children's book talking about the Rainbow Bridge. So some questions after the story would be, who was Hutash? They would say an earth goddess who made the island that the Chumash people lived on. Who was she married to, and what gift did she give the Chumash tribe? Some responses would be she was married to the sky snake and he gave them fire. And then how did Hutash get the Chumash people to the mainland? And some responses would be she built them a rainbow bridge to cross over. And then the last question would be what happened to those who fell off the bridge? And they could say that Hutash turned them into dolphins. So now that they have learned about the Chumash customs and creation story, you'll be split into your jigsaw groups, and you will tell your peers about what you've learned and help them fill out the Venn diagram that we'll have information about all three of the tribes that we were talking about.
And then for my center, I would start off letting the students know exactly what we'd be learning about. So I would start off by saying, so for our center, we were looking at the Mono tribe. We will look at what they ate, where they lived, and the kind of houses they made, along with the folklore they told and their religion. For starters, we will look at where they lived. So at this time, the teacher will hand out the map that's on screen right now to the students and give them a couple seconds of thinking time so they can be ready to respond for the next question. Which will be based on the map. Where do you think they lived? Some possible responses could be middle of California, in the middle, or the shaded area. And then once there's some responses, the teacher will inform the students about the actual location by saying that they lived in the east central part of California by the slopes of the Sierra Nevada mountains, and that they lived in the Fresno and Tulare County areas. The teacher will then give time for students to write down the information before moving on, and then checking for understanding by asking the question, who can tell me where they live, to all students or to just one student? And the responses could be East Central California by the mountains, or Fresno and Tulare. And then we proceed on to the housing structures. The teacher will then tell the students to think of kind of what types of houses they lived in, and to think about our houses today and if the houses would look the same or if they would be different. And then the response would be, for that question, would hopefully be different. And then once that is clear that the houses would be different, the teacher will give them time to brainstorm ideas from the gallery walk as to the pictures that they saw and kind of what they already know. So the teacher would tell them not to take a few minutes to think about how the houses looked and think about what you saw during the gallery walk as inspiration. And it would give them a few minutes to think independently. And then the students would share their responses, and the teacher would ask, who can give me an idea? And the responses might be, they may be made out of wood, they look like a cone, a cabin, might have looked like a tent, but with leaves instead of the plastic. And then from those possible responses, you can make connections to some of the answers, some of the possible answers that the students could give, which would be, I like the houses you came up with, and some parts are correct about the houses that they lived in. The houses look like a cone shape, kind of like a tent, but it was made out of long wooden sticks covered by leaves. And again, the teacher would allow the students to write down that information. And then once the location, the house is clear, they would move on to the food. And the teacher would be asking, what kind of food do you think they ate? to all the students, and some possible responses would be rabbit, fish, berries, pigs, chicken. And once those answers are stated, the teacher will then direct the students to more of the area that they lived in by saying, we know where they lived. They lived around the mountain area. So what kind of animals do we find in those areas? And some of the responses could be deer, fish, lizards, mountain lions. And then at that point, the teacher would show pictures of the animals found in those types of areas and possible animals that the tribe might have hunted. And then the teacher would name those out, saying that we have deer, fish, insects, and bears in those areas. And then the teacher will let the children think of which animals they may have hunted or eaten as a tribe. And some of the answers could be all of them, all but the bear, or only the deer and fish. And then the teacher will explain that they ate all of those options. And then again, give additional time for the students to write down that information. And then the teacher would move on by checking with the students and again and getting some questions answered, going back to where did they live. The responses could be Central California, Fresno, Tulare, or lower mountain areas. What did their houses look like and what were they made out of? They looked like a cone shape made out of wood and leaves as a response. And the last question would be, what food did they eat? And the response would be fish, deer, bear, and berries. And then the teacher would move on into the clothing and would hand out a piece of cloth that was used for their clothing and would let the students know the kind of material it was made out of, which was deer skin, and how they would wear it. The teacher would let them know that the tribe would use it as a skirt for both men and women, and then that the women would use kind of like a rag cloth to put on their heads when they would carry different food items like the berries on their heads in a bowl. And then finally, they would talk about the religion, and the teacher would let them know that the religion for the tribe, they didn't really celebrate too many traditions, but the main one would be the use of totems, which they would either hand out a replica toy of a totem or a picture of it to the students, and let them know that they were very passionate about their totems, that it would give them power to the family that owned that totem. They only had two different types of totems, which would have been the eagle and either the dove or the butterfly. So they would have those pictures or replica of that given to the students so they kind of know what it looks like. And then they would end off by looking at the website that the teacher found to kind of collect the information and get ready for the next part, which the teacher will then remind the students that all the information that they gather will be used for the Venn diagram that will be filled out in the next part, and then they would transition into their next group.
Okay, I'm gonna quickly go over the rest of the lesson just to save on time. So the students would be jigsaw teaching each other and filling out their Venn diagram together, which would look like this. And then for the elaboration portion, we would have them research a new tribe that we had not talked about, and the teachers would give a list of tribes in the California area that they can research on their own, the different characteristics that we taught to look for in class, and that's where they would fill out the new tribe section in their Venn diagram. And then moving into evaluation, they're going to be picking their product that they will be doing, such as either a outline, a blog journal, or a mind map. And we have an example of what a mind map would look like, and their outline and their blog journal. And at the very end, to wrap it up, we would do the L section of our KWL chart, which is what did we learn, what did you find most interesting, and what similarities and differences did you find between the tribes. And I believe that is everything. Thank you.